Hey guys, Afterglow here, bringing you a tutorial on how to make a jump map in TF2. If you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you've never made a map before and you don't have any idea how it's done, so I'm going to start from the basic necessities and build my way up from there. I'm going to be making 3 levels so you can follow along and learn the process of how it's done. Okay, the first thing you want to do is go to your Steam library, then go to Tools in the drop down, then Source SDK. Here it is. Make sure the current game is set to Team Fortress 2 and then click on Hammer Editor at the top. So this is the program you're going to be using, and the first thing I'm going to do is just go to File, New, and you should see 4 screens like this, 3 with a grid and 1 without. The 3 screens with the grids are your cross-section views, so your X, Y, and Z dimensions, and the blank screen is the 3-dimensional view where you can see everything together and basically just a preview of your map. On the left side, you have tools, which you will use the most, some settings up top, and on the other side, just some other settings and tools as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on my jump map. I'm going to go to the block tool here, or hit Shift B, which is the hotkey, and then left click in one of the grid views and drag a box, and you'll see numbers on each of the sides, which are the dimensions. Let go of left click and then hit enter, and that will create the block. You can then go to the selection tool or hit Shift S, and that will select the block you've just made. And as you can see, the dimensions reappeared, and you can resize it as well by just left clicking and dragging any of the boxes in any of the grid views. So the block tool is your fundamental tool when mapping. Basically your core structure is going to involve a bunch of blocks manipulated in such a way that floors, walls, ceilings, and rooms are created. To help get a sense of what I've just made, I'm going to go to the 3D view and view my block from there. So to get there, I'm going to left click, which will unselect the block, and then hit a Z. And once I've done that, I can now move around with WASD and my mouse, just like in game. Oh, there's one other thing you should do, which is go to View and then click 3D Textured Polygons, so you can basically see the textures on each side of the block. This block in 3D space corresponds to the one I drew earlier in the 2D view. So for instance, if I were to select this top view here and drag it around just by holding left click and letting it go, you'll see that it corresponds to the other windows. You can also select a block, by the way, by dragging a box over it or clicking the X, which is found at the center of the block, or left clicking it in 3D view. And you can deselect by left clicking elsewhere or just hitting escape. So there are a few other ways you can manipulate blocks. For instance, if you select it and then left click again, you'll have the option of rotating the block by dragging the circles on the corners. This works for any of the 2D grids. Or if you left click again, you have the option of skewing it by dragging the white boxes around. And by the way, Control Z will undo, just like in any other program, and left click again to get back to the normal selection mode. Another useful tool is the Transform tool, which you can bring up by hitting Control M, and this gives you the option of precisely rotating, scaling, or moving the block. So for instance, if I want to rotate around the Z axis by 45 degrees, I can do that just like this. And there it is. And you can also scale it, so if I want to double the length of one side, I can do that just by changing the value to 2. I personally don't ever really use the move option on the transform tool, as I find it easier to just use the 2D grid and move the selection that way. Next, I want to talk about the importance of the 2D grid. You may have noticed when you make a block or move it around, it will snap to the grid. And the function of this is that it allows you to have a much more organized layout, and you can align things much more precisely. So you can see the size of the grid in the lower right corner here, and I'm using 16 units as my grid size. You can change the grid size by using the square brackets, which are found just below the backspace sign. So left square bracket will decrease, right will increase, and most mappers will use 16 or 32 as a grid size, as any more you don't really have much precision, and any less it will get really messy to look at and work with. You should strive to use the same grid size for the entire map and try not to misalign blocks or selections off the grid. Though it's not really the end of the world if things do happen to get misaligned, but definitely strive to keep it as aligned as possible. Also, by the way, a hammer unit is approximately 1 inch in real life, and to get a sense of scale, a person in-game is 64 units high, and a rocket jump is around 550 units. So now I'm going to go over some of the ways you can maneuver around in the 2D grids. You can zoom in and out using mouse wheel, or if you hold space you can slide around, and that's basically all I really use. So now that we got the basics out of the way, I'm going to go on and continue with my map. So my first level is just going to be a rocket jump from one platform to another, so I need to make another block as the other platform. Let me just scale this down a bit, and now I need to make a copy of this. So to do this, you hold shift and then drag using left click and let go, and that will make an exact copy. Of course, I could have just used the block tool to make another block, but duplicating the first platform is just more efficient. So now I have my 2 blocks. Now how do I know this is a good distance for a rocket jump? I don't. I just need to go in game and test it. But there's a few things I need to do before I go test that. For one thing, I need to add a player spawn, but I also need to seal it off from the void. The void is basically all this empty space. So if I were to test it as it is now, if I were to fall off this block, I would fall off forever. So I need to add a floor, ceiling, and walls to seal it off from the void. Now the easiest way to do that is just to make a block around these 2 platforms and then hollow out that block. So the first thing I need to do is make a block around these 2 platforms. So Shift B for the block tool, enter to create, and let me just look at that here. It looks a bit short, so I'm going to make it taller, and then you go to tools, make hollow, and I'm going to use a negative value so my walls will go outwards 16 units wide. So there we go, and each wall is 16 units, and here's the inside. So now it's sealed off from the void. Now in looking at this, I just realized it's really hard to distinguish between the platforms and the box around it. So what I want to do is retexture the box, and to do this I hit Shift A, and that will bring up the face edit sheet. So there's a bunch of settings here, don't really worry about it. There's the current texture, as you can see. So I hit browse, and then it opens up a pop-up of all the textures in Hammer. Now what I'm looking for is developer texture. So in the filter I'm going to type dev, and this will narrow down the amount of textures that pop up to just the developer textures. So I'm just going to go with this blue one right here. Then hit apply, and that will apply the texture to the selection. Most mappers use dev textures in the preliminary stages of the map as it's cleaner and they're high contrast, so you can easily tell the difference between them. Now I'm going to retexture the 2 platforms just for the sake of consistency. And to select multiple things at once, you hold Control and then just left click, and there we go, I've selected both things. And Shift A again, browse. Now I'm going to choose the red one. There we go. Now one last thing I need to do before testing this is add a player spawn. So I'm going to add it on this platform. So I hit Shift E and then left click, and that will create a player spawn, otherwise known as an entity. So Shift E is the hotkey for the entity tool, and an entity is basically everything that isn't a regular block. So things like intel, cap points, models, teleports, those are all entities. Every entity has object properties, and you can view this by selecting it. First I hit Shift S because I was still in the entity tool, and now if you hit Alt Enter, this will bring up the object properties, or you can double click, and here it is. So every entity has a bunch of settings. For instance, this is the player team spawn, and here are the settings. For instance, I can set the team to red, so only red will be able to spawn at this point. So now I'm ready to test this, just to make sure these 2 platforms are a good distance from each other. So the first thing I need to do is save it. Now note the name you give it will be the name of the map, so I'm going to call mine jump_tutorial. And note the file type of VMF file, and save. So Hammer works with VMF files, but that is not a file that you can open in TF2 and play. So what you need to do is compile the VMF into a .bsp, which is a playable map. So you go to File, Run Map, or F9, and this thing will pop up. And there are a bunch of things here. Just hit OK for now, and then this compile process window will pop up. And when you see the copy to clipboard sign at the bottom, that means the map is fully compiled and ready to test. So here I am in TF2, and I want to test my map. So console map jump tutorial, which is what I just called it, and that will create a server. And here we go. So here's the map, and already I can tell that is too large of a distance. Yeah, definitely. So I need to go back and readjust that. And also, by the way, I have keys bound to no clip and hurt me, which is very useful for testing. I also have a key bound to my regen script, and you should consider it too if you're making a map. So I'm gonna stop the first part of the tutorial here and pick up later. I recommend, if you're looking to make a jump map, to just get into the program and get used to the UI, because it does take some time to get used to, but once you get used to it, you can map efficiently and quickly. Another useful thing I want to bring up is the Valve developer webpage. So if you just Google anything about Hammer, so selection tool Hammer SDK, it'll take you to the Valve developer community webpage. Basically, it has a more detailed description of everything in Hammer, and it's definitely worth taking a look at for basically every tool. So selection tool, block tool, you should just Google them and read through. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll try to answer them, or you can go to the mapping forum on tf2jump.com and start a thread about it, and people will most likely be able to help you. Alright, see you guys later!